Welcome to Shelf Life. Thank you for joining me on Jamaicans.com for another episode. As always, remember, like the page, drop a comment in the section below, and share this with your friends. Today on Shelf Life, I'm doing something completely different. Notice I'm not in my regular studio. So it is Bob Marley's birthday, it is Reggae Month, it is Black History Month, all rolled into one, a lot to celebrate in 1 month. So I'm going to be doing it a little bit different this time. And I'm actually going to be showing you an episode of Shelf Life that I did several years ago with Anjahli Parnell, the writer of the Biography of Empress Mennen. And she was the wife of Haile Selassie, Emperor Haile Selassie. But before I do that, I do want to share something for Black History, and then I'll get into the show. Black History Month. Whenever I think of Black History Month and I see people celebrate it, somehow it's always about what happened after slavery. And several years ago, when I went to Jamaica on the Jamaican Poet Store with Malachi Smith, I got so frustrated when I asked the students about Black history, and all I could ever hear about is what happened after slavery. So out of my frustration, I wrote this for them. Our history did not begin with slavery. It began with Nubian queens and kings, emperors, pharaohs, and mighty things. It began in a garden, a story untold, a continent so rich our ancestors lined their chariots with gold. To confuse us and misuse us, they divide us and deride us, teaching us that the browner the skin, the more we will win. The less the melanin, the richer the thing. Forcing it into our psyche till we all bleach out with skin. Pitting brother against brother in a fight to be seen as equal but better. House slaves treated with less disdain, yet forgetting that slaves, they still remain. But our history did not begin with slavery. It did not begin on a ship. Our history transcends voyages on ill-fated trips, more than savagery and pain, more than jungles and dancing in the rain. We were creators of the alphabet while the West was still illiterate. The first calendar man ever know was created in Egypt 5,000 years ago. Builders of pyramids and the Sphinx, modern engineers still can't think. A legacy rich with science and math, charted civilization's original path. Our history did not begin with slavery. Don't let them trick you with tomfoolery. Our history did not begin with slavery. Hope you enjoyed that. I hope that has brought you into the space where we can actually now truly enjoy this conversation about Empress Mennen and Emperor Haile Selassie and the book written by Anjahli Parnell, the Biography of Empress Mennen. Welcome to Shelf Life. This week my guest is Anjahli Parnell, who has written the Biography of Empress Mennen as far. She was Selassie's wife, the emperor himself. And she was the Empress, and it's a very interesting book. Anjahli, welcome to Shelf Life.
Thank you.
I'm so excited to have you on with us. And before we get into the book, though, I want to hear a bit more about you.
Okay.
Tell me about you. What's your background? How did you get into writing this book?
Well, I was interested in Ethiopia from a long time ago because it was the only country in Africa that was never colonized. And I lived in South Africa for many years, which everybody knows was colonized for a long time.
Right.
So I just thought it was such a powerful African country to never be overrun by the people coming in to take whatever they could from Africa. So that was number one. And then through my Kingman, you know, I learned more and more about the Rastafari faith.
Right.
And then I started to look at the information about Empress Mennen, and there really isn't much. There was a biography that was written on her 57th birthday by the same man, Gabriel Michael, and Yared Michael, Gabriel Yared Michael, and that's on the internet. But there really wasn't much else.
So about her.
I was fascinated, and then I had the chance to go to Ethiopia and back to South Africa. So we took a trip, and I set the intention before I left, asked for guidance from God,
right,
to bring some information about her that I could share with the world, if that was, you know, meant to be.
But what's your background?
My background, okay, I'm an Alaskan. I was born in Alaska, and, you know, in the early days, and that's where I'm from. And
Dog
then
sledding and all?
Not much of that, but sledding. And then I moved to California. I went to college in Oregon, then I moved to California, and then from there I transferred to South Africa. I lived there for many years, and then I moved back to Hawaii to be with my folks in their
And you're a writer, your background is in writing or journalism?
I have done a lot of travel writing just because I love to travel and it's a way to fund my trips. But really, I was a computer analyst. I kind of dropped out of that. I've done many different things.
I know that feeling.
Yeah.
I can say the same thing.
Okay.
Many different things. Find a dream and chase it.
Right.
Yes.
Find what your passion is.
Yes, and just chase it.
And then when I started this journey, it just became more and more interesting, and it's so fascinating. This family, the family of the.
Where were some of the places you went to when you went to Africa?
Well, we went to South Africa. We went back to visit my friends, and then we flew up to Ethiopia from there.
And the places in Ethiopia, I think you went to the birthplace.
Yeah, that was an interesting story because we were supposed to fly from Addis to Lalibela for Timkat.
Right.
And then, the flights were booked and we didn't.
Had to do a really arduous drive.
Oh my God, and by then I was already sick from the high altitude. I wasn't handling the high altitude very well. I had a cold. I was coughing a lot. And then when I saw this area, I kind of perked up and I asked, where is this place? What is this place? And they said, this is Ambosel. And then our guide said, this is where Empress Mennen was born. Okay, it was in the distance. It's an Amba, which, it's like a hilltop, flat hilltop, where she was from and where her family was from. She was born into nobility, so
she was born into nobility, okay.
Yes, from several different sides.
Okay.
Her mother was the daughter of King Michael, and then her father was I'm not quite sure how you say it, but the Jantar, which was the leader of this area where she was from.
So I guess it made sense that she ended up marrying somebody who would be the emperor.
Sure.
It did, because normally families would be forming alliances and stuff like that when they get married.
Right.
All right, so you went to Africa, you went to Ethiopia. What was the reception like from the people that you had to interview? Did you get to meet with her descendants and talk with any of them?
I did not. At that time, I think there's only a few that live in Ethiopia or have recently moved back. At that point, I didn't really know who her descendants were. That you hardly hear anything about the children or the grandchildren. And I've added all that to the book to make it more, to
give it some more meaning.
Right. Yeah.
And where did that research come from that you got to add to the book?
Well, it's from reading books. From the book, I was given a book. I met this man named Abby Cheney, young university student, and he had asked on my behalf one of the old clerics and teachers from the theology college, and that man had kept a lot of books safe from the
so he had a lot of the information.
Right, he had this old book.
All right, we're gonna hang on one moment because we're gonna take a quick break right here on Shelf Life, right here at Bookophilia. We're having a discussion about the biography of Empress Mennen Asfaw, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Shelf Life. We're speaking with Anjahli Parnell, and she's the author of the biography of Empress Mennen Asfaw, who was the wife for 50 years of Emperor Haile Selassie. And we're having a great time here. I'm learning so much. I learned so much about her devotion to her Christianity and the role of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which I think is something that I didn't really expect. I'm so used to the idea, and maybe it's just because I'm ignorant of it, but that empresses and queens really don't do much. But it seems that she did a lot.
She did a lot.
The book itself is about her life, so it really tells you about some of the stuff that she did. But before I get to that, this book is a translation from another language. Right.
It's from the ecclesiastic, the religious language Ge'ez. It's an old language. They still write, they had the Bible in that, and they use it in all the religious services.
And it's still used today?
Yes, to some extent. Mostly they use Amharic, but I think some of the readings are still in Gaze. And so it was translated to Amharic, and then it was translated from Amharic to English. So that was a big project right there.
Tell me about that translation and how that went for you. I mean, the person that you were working with.
Yeah, he was in Ethiopia. He's the one that brought the book forward, and he coordinated the whole thing. He translated it from Ge'ez to Amharic, and then he had a team of guys who translated it to English. So he was in charge of that, and it was pretty rough when I got it, because it's very difficult to translate that language into English.
I can imagine.
It's a very different structure, the two languages.
And we didn't lose much in the translation?
Oh, no, I wouldn't say so.
Good.
Just some of the words were a little bit old, but, there's a lot of references to God, and so I left most of those in.
And she seemed to have had quite a devotion to Mary. Mary seems to be really big in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church.
Of all the Eastern Christian religion, which the Ethiopian Orthodox Church falls under, all the Orthodox churches, theirs brings Mary through the most.
Okay.
And that's what I loved, because it's the feminine aspect of Christianity. You wonder where it is sometimes. And you say Miriam to an Ethiopian woman who's a Christian, and the eyes just go soft. They just love this woman because she's all about kindness. And really, Empress Mennen was all about kindness and doing good works. And they have a 2-week celebration of Mary, that first you fast for some days, and then you have this 2-week celebration where there's services at night. They read from the Book of Miracles of Mary, and it's explained a little bit, and quite a bit of the other stories about Mary. I mean, there's a lot of myth around Mother Mary as well, but there's a lot of stories.
You said they read from the Miracles of Mary? Tell me about that book real quickly, because I've never heard of that book.
Okay, I think it's brought through in the Catholic Church a little bit too, but it's the Bible that we know of. It's taken from many different books, and then they just pull it all together.
Okay.
And so this is the book of the Miracles of Mary. There's a long section and a short section, and I think there's 1,000 miracles of Mary in the longer section. And Mary did a lot of miracles, and when she passed over, a lot of people were healed.
That's interesting. I should look that up. I want to touch on a quick part of the book that was very interesting for me. Well, it's all interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of detail.
But Empress Mennen appeals to the women of the world. And this was such an interesting speech, because this was right before the war. Right before
the Italian invasion. Right, and they were building up their troops on the border. They knew these people were, they were bringing in supplies. They knew these people were imminently coming through. They couldn't stop them.
These were her words. At this very moment, when a disastrous war is intended and planned against us, I would like to make clear that all women across the world should make their voices heard and express their opinions. Even though we live in different countries and different climates, all women are related in their stand for the peace of the world. And that's so true. I didn't realize what a powerful woman she was. And this book not only brings out, as you say, her charitable side and her kindness, but her absolute power that she had. I always would have thought that the emperor had all the power and she was a quiet, mousy one.
Oh, no. He wrote that she was his greatest advisor. So I'm sure they talked about everything. And they started a newspaper together that they edited together, and she was with him by his side whenever he made all these journeys to open up schools, to open up the bridge.
Yeah, she seemed to have been involved in opening up schools and all kinds of facilities.
Right, child care centers.
She was an active empress, not one of the pretty ones who just sat by the wayside and had people fanning her with palm leaves. Ladies and gentlemen, this is good, and it's gonna get better. Don't go anywhere. You're watching Shelf Life, recorded here at Bookophilia. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Shelf Life. Let's get back to the book.
All right.
Because the book is really, really great. It's the biography of Empress Mennen Asfaw. I want to talk about the marriage, which is, I'm sure, what everybody's interested in. And I learned about the marriage, not just the fact that they were married, which is pretty much all I ever knew before, but the actual marriage to Haile Selassie. Now, she was married 3 times before she married him.
Right.
And that was more of a cultural thing.
Right. It's very typical of women to be married at an early age or be betrothed, you know, especially if she was from a noble family. They had family alliances, like you mentioned already. And so if she wouldn't have been married early, it would have been very unusual.
It would have been almost
at these times. Right. She was married to a man, and then she divorced that man. The second man passed away, and then the third, I think that was just dissolved, because once she met Haile Selassie, they really hit it off. She met him at her uncle's house.
That I see. I saw when the uncle thought, you know, it was obviously love at first sight.
You know, they were both from a coffee background. He was from a coffee producing area, and then her family had coffee producing land, so they had that in common. She just arrived in Addis Ababa, the big city, but she, you know, she had a background where she was educated, which was also very unusual for girls.
For a girl at that time.
At that time. So her parents, especially her mother, I think, was really a forward-thinking mother, which made her really a woman by the time she reached 20 when they got married, ahead of her time. You know, she was open, she was friendly, and I think he must have liked it. And at the same time, for his political career, it states in his biography that he was on the search for a nice wife.
Okay, so she was 20.
He was
19 when they got married, and they stayed married for 50 years.
50 years, yeah.
That's a long time.
Until she passed away.
Yeah, that was a long time.
They first lived in Harar, which was his birthplace, and so that was a new place for her. And you know, it took her 45 days to get there, and then they married.
Ask, in terms of distance, how far was that?
Well, it's a good day's drive.
Okay.
A half a day's drive. We drove it in a car, but in those days she would have ridden on a horse probably all the way there. He sent his best friends and you know, to bring her from Addis Ababa to Harar. They got married just on the outskirts, and then they moved into you know, the governor's palace and lived there. She had her first 2 children there. And that was quite a story when her son was born. This Yasu, who was her uncle who introduced the two of them, he was put on the throne, and he decided to take the area of Harar, although they'd had agreement not to do that. And he asked her to leave the palace. She was pregnant, 8 months pregnant, so she begged to stay until she had the baby. He allowed her to stay. And then I think a few days, maybe a month, 2 months after, about 2 months, because the baby was christened there, she had to take this journey to Addis Ababa by, once again, horses and by train. They caught the train part of the way. And then she lived in Addis Ababa from then on. Okay. And soon after that, she became a princess when he was crowned the crown prince and made a Ross. And so, you know, she was used to living like that, but I think she was a very active mother.
What I found interesting too, reading the book, is although she became the empress, you know, I'm not so sure I could be, you know, so humble if I was an empress, but she just really seemed to maintain her humility. Yes. You know, she was one with the people. Yes. She was everywhere, you know, in the hospitals, in the schools, and she didn't seem to, even though she was elevated by virtue of being an empress, she didn't seem to elevate herself above her people, which I found very, very interesting. And through all the years of her marriage to Selassie, they clearly remained one union. One unit. Oh yes. That comes across so clear in this book. What about their years in exile?
Well, once the Italians did come in and take over, they dashed out of the country. It was decided that they would leave so that, you know, potentially he wasn't, the family wasn't harmed. So they left and went to Jerusalem. And she was comfortable in Jerusalem. It was a warm climate, and there was the Ethiopian churches there, so she could speak her language.
And all the time that she was there, she was just praying.
Oh yeah.
She kept praying to return to her country and for her people.
Right, in the Church of Bethlehem, which is where you know, it's a church that was built in the place that Jesus is believed to be born. Right. She prayed and prayed and prayed.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
This was a powerful, powerful woman of God. You know, we never, I don't know about you, but I've never thought of the Ethiopian Empress as being a powerful woman of God, but clearly she was. Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Shelf Life. We're talking with Anjahli Parnell about the biography of Empress Mennen. Don't go anywhere. We've got a lot more for you. Really exciting segment coming up. Welcome back to Shelf Life. We're speaking with Anjahli Parnell about the biography of Empress Mennen. You were talking to me before we started about her crown.
Right. That's what I found fascinating, because if you look at the image on the book, which are the coronation photographs, you'll see two opposing lions on her crown. Mm-hmm. And then if you look at other photographs in the book, there's a picture of her crown itself, and on the front, right in the back, there's a color photograph, there's a few color photographs in the back. There's a picture of Mother Mary and Jesus, and then Michael and Gabriel are on either side of that. And so that was two crowns. And then when she was in exile and praying in this church in Bethlehem, she promised to give her crown to this church.
Okay.
So she did. Later on, she had it sent back to Jerusalem.
And it's still there?
I'm sure it's still there. I haven't been able to verify what it looks like. So there's these two crowns, because what was Haile Selassie made a second crown for future empresses, and that was what was put on her casket when she, you know, during her funeral, right? And that's the one in the picture, and that's the crown that stands next to his crown at the palace at the moment.
At the moment.
So
I find the pictures very interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, some of them are black and white, and you can tell that they're older pictures.
Yeah.
But I find them so very interesting. Empress Mennen in viewing metal handcrafts, visiting the art school, celebrating the 25th silver coronation jubilee. You know, a lot of very interesting pictures in here. And then we have all these medals and, of course, the crown, the beautiful crown, and this gorgeous picture of her, such a stately, beautiful woman.
And there's even a picture of her house. You can barely see it, but it's there. And her church, her early church in Ambassel. So,
if there was one thing you wanted people to take from this book, you know, when you were writing it, the one thing that you really wanted people to know why you wrote this book, what would that be?
She was such a visionary. She was a woman ahead of her time. She was raised in a way that brought her into modern life, because at that time Ethiopia was fairly isolated with its mountainous terrain, and it was just, you know, Africa already was the back of the beyond.
Right.
And just that, you know, she had a modern outlook, and she was so accomplished. You know, she was well educated. She was quite a businesswoman.
And she must have educated herself some too.
Oh, she must have. She must have. I think she learned English. She very rarely spoke English in public, but she did have a pretty good command of the language. And her humanitarian efforts were all sustainable. She had given so many of the schools and the child care centers stocks and revenue from companies, or she gave them land that she had inherited to support the churches that she built, to support the monks,
to make it sustainable,
and to make it sustainable, so that their you know, their operating expenses were covered through the year, and that just is fantastic.
And
I
that
think
lasted
fantastic.
right into her later years, because she died at what would have been pretty old back then.
Yeah, 71.
I mean, back then that's like dying at 101.
Oh
now.
yeah, oh yeah.
And
She
didn't live
quite old, and she had
to be that old.
She had, you know, diabetes, so that, and in the end, it was her heart that really gave out. Yeah.
Wow, and she had a big state funeral.
Oh yeah, you couldn't keep people away from Addis Ababa. 50,000 people.
There was a passage you wanted to read, which just talks about the adoration that people had for her.
Right. I'll just read a paragraph. It was when she returned to Ethiopia after the exile, and Della Hansen worked. She was a missionary wife who worked at the palace. She was a very trusted friend of the family, and so Empress Mennen arrived by plane with her daughter Tesai. As she stepped out of the airline, She might have stood for a moment to smile and wave to her husband, the emperor, and her two sons, Crown Prince Afswausen and Prince Makonnen, as well as the crowd assembled there to greet her, and daughter Princess Tsai. Then, at last surrounded by family and friends who spoke her native tongue, she might have thanked God that she was home and looked up to notice that the sky was heavy with impending rain. Several soldiers were posted along the route from the airport where thousands of people gathered to catch a glimpse of beloved Empress Mennen.
Thousands of people gathered to catch just a glimpse of her.
And then as she moved through in the motor car, you could hear this ululation, you know, and that's how everybody in the palace knew she was coming closer, closer, closer. They could hear this. And then when she got there, the palace staff, which was probably anywhere from 150 to 200 people, were all lined up from outside right up.
All the way up.
The stairs right up.
Wow.
And they all just fell to the floor because that was the traditional greeting in Ethiopia. So they just...
Well, you know, I wish we could just keep talking about this book, but people, you've got to buy the book. If you want to hear about this, you've got to buy the book. You've just got to read this book. The book is The Biography of Empress Mennen Asfa. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been talking with Anjahli Parnell right here on Shelf Life. You've got to get this book. It is about a powerful, powerful woman who we didn't know much about before. Well, we've come to the end of another episode of Shelf Life. Thank you again for joining me right here. As always, share this with your friends. Check out my website, learn a little bit more about me and the work that I do, and see some other Shelf Life episodes. But I'll see you again next week, same place, same time with a brand new episode, and you get to see what else is on my shelf. Walk good.